think the accumulation of these things means that in some ways, certainly, I absolutely no longer believe in a self. That's one thing. So that said, I don't live completely selflessly.
So we've been talking about awakening in videos for a few days, and I thought it might be nice to have something more informal and more interactive as a way of drawing out any stray thoughts or things that don't fit in neatly into one of these videos that we've been doing. And I found myself wondering, in a way, a bit more personally, how did you get interested in awakening in the first place? How did it come into your life?
Whoa. Okay. Fair question. Understanding what's actually going on has always been a preoccupation. For as long back as I can remember, understanding what's going on has been a preoccupation. And I think, in my teens, certainly, I started to get a sense that different people had different views, different people saw things differently, and who was right? What was the right way of seeing? So I started to understand relativism to some extent, that different people had different views. And then I started to wonder, within all of this, what was the right view? I was also really, really, really interested in the psychedelic revolution that was happening in places like the UK and the United States at that time. And I came from South Africa to the UK, partly because I wanted to get away from apartheid and for various other political reasons, but also because I was really, really interested in the psychedelic revolution. And fairly early in my stay then in the UK, when I arrived at age 19, I got involved in psychedelics. And that was revelatory. That absolutely persuaded me that my ordinary way of seeing things, my ordinary mode of consciousness, was not really aligned with how things actually are. That consciousness is very much more fluid than it appears. That things are much more malleable than they appear, and that points of view are what matters, that you can see things very, very differently. And gradually then, in my reading of philosophical and spiritual literature, I started to see that there was the possibility of awakening, although I misconceived it, I think, quite dramatically at the time. And I remember when I first met a Buddhist teacher, the question I had for him was, tell me about the void. And I thought that was represented a very serious misunderstanding, but he had the wisdom to say, I know nothing about that, but I can tell you how to meditate. And he did. So I think it was my early investigations in philosophy and spirituality, prompted in part by psychedelics, that led me down this track.
And if I remember right, you studied philosophy?
I studied philosophy at bachelor's degree level, yeah.
Was that a useful investigation?
Not really, no. Well, all it did was convince me that British academic philosophy at that time was barking up some seriously wrong trees. It wasn't, as far as I could see, certainly so far as I was learning anything about it, it wasn't really deeply investigating the nature of experience. And there was, so far as I could see, insufficient first-person exploration of, how my experience emerges. It was very abstract, a relationship of concepts, and what is sayable and not sayable, rather than actually how do I come to experience and what is the nature of experience.
So it sounds like a very big contrast between the psychedelic explorations and this. I presume they were at the same time in your life?
Yeah. To some extent. I think the psychedelics came first.
Yeah.
But they were more or less at the same time. But the relationship between concepts and what you may say and may not say is dull. It has some value for sure, but a limited value when it comes to really understanding the nature of experience.
Yeah. And in the psychedelic experiments you did, or the trips you went on at the time, were there insights, or were there? How does that look? How does that feel looking back? Was it useful?
Yeah, it was very useful.
Yeah,
it was very useful. A couple of things maybe stand out for me. 3 things maybe stand out for me. One is the malleability of experience. How, when the ordinary categories into which we fit things are changed, everything changes. That's one thing. Another thing was the nature of time. Seeing at first hand the complete malleability of time. How, you could really have eternity in an hour, and so on. So that, but also I had several really quite interesting trips where I started to see the way in which self and world co-emerge. That with a certain kind of self, I occupied a certain kind of world. And then I could be a different self in a different world, and I could be yet another self in yet another world. And and by that, sometimes I mean quite subtle differences. So if I was tripping with friends, you could have this moment of a little status tussle. And in this little status tussle, sometimes you could be up and sometimes you could be down. And when you were up, you noticed the world was shaped in one way, and when you were down, you noticed the world was shaped in a different way. And you kept moving. It was possible to move between these very, very different selves and very, very different worlds. And it was very, very apparent the way self and world interact. That there isn't a single world in which we occupy as a single self, but rather the world is always changing, and we are always changing. And things are very malleable. I guess another insight I had is one time I spoke this out on the trip, is that I'd somehow got into the files. I got into the filing cabinet of my own mind, and I was able to sort of riffle through some of the structural elements to see how my take on the world was constructed, and historically and in the present moment, and really get to investigate it at first hand. It was a fascinating experience.
And so did you contact Buddhism at kind of shortly after that? Or?
Yeah, early on. I arrived in the UK at 19 and started doing this stuff, and then at about 21, when I was 21, so that would have been 76, I met a Buddhist teacher, or a guy who'd come to the town I was staying in to set up a Buddhist center, and he taught me to meditate. Yeah. So that was 76, and I took to it like a duck to water, I must say. I mean, it was just what I'd been looking for. And by 77, I joined a Buddhist order and was off, and I decided that was what I was going to do with my life. Yeah.
How was that socially for you, kind of joining a community like that so quickly at that age? Was it smooth?
It was very smooth in. It was a bit leaving people behind, as it were. There was friends who were quite bewildered by what was happening. That was sad, and I was a bit abrupt with that. And my family did not like the idea one bit, and that was tricky. But I was absolutely convinced that I was doing the right thing, and I remain convinced about that. But it's these counterfactuals are a bit, cliff. But if I could go back in time, I'd have managed the transition more smoothly. Taken more people along with me.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a way, with this transition, I mean, maybe this is in my mind, but I'm just hearing this interest to be kind of explored through the context of psychedelics and then moving into Buddhism.
Yeah.
Yeah. What transitioned with you, or I'm just curious. Did you feel like you had to leave one behind in order to engage with meditation?
Yes,
Yeah.
I had to leave the psychedelics behind for sure.
Why was that?
I think because they were partly energy expensive. You know, you'd be wiped out. I'd be wiped out for several days afterwards after a trip. And that had an impact on the meditation. And I saw the meditation as cumulative, as something that was going to build over time. And that the psychedelics and other, even cannabis, alcohol, were all disruptive of that process and had high costs in that process. So if I was serious about, you know, building a meditation practice, then I just needed to focus on that. And I thought that was worth doing because although the psychedelics were exciting, I didn't feel they left me changed. They changed my view of things to some extent. They afforded certain insights to some extent. But then I come back into, you know, being a grumpy, confused young man. And my sense was that real transformation was going to take work over time. And that wasn't going to be through the drugs. You know, the drugs opened a gateway, but then I had to get on with walking the path. And the drugs had no place in that.
I'm partly asking because there's a resurgence of interest in psychedelics these days, especially in a way much more serious kind of way.
Yes.
What do you think of that?
I utterly celebrate it. I think it's fantastic. I think, well, we now seem to know that the crusade against psychedelics was politically motivated. It was part of the anti-hippie, anti-war, anti-Vietnam War opposition to those who were opposed to the Vietnam War and who were looking for a different way of being, and that some of that was consciously carried out in part to criminalize these people. So, you know, it is time now to redress that balance. At the same time, would I want, you know, everyone, 16-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids, to be experimenting with psychedelics? I'm not sure about that. Just free form, hey, let's party. I'm not sure about that. But that it's being used clinically, I'm absolutely in favor of, and the way in which it's being used clinically seems to me to be highly responsible and well informed. And I think its use for people who are well can be profound, can be really life-changing. It can really help people to come to another way of seeing and being in the world, at least open doors. How you create any kind of regulatory framework that means it won't do any damage, I don't know. I don't know how to do that. But I'm glad that we seem to be in process of coming to a more intelligent and informed view of psychedelics.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the other questions I had, kind of ranging around this area, was because I know you very well over a long time, and I know that the Buddhist movement that you got involved with had quite a big emphasis on the inner world, but also a big emphasis on changing the world.
Yes.
I have a question. It's quite a big question. It's like, how has that been for you in a way? If you look back over how you tried to change the world, maybe as a hippie, if I can say that, and then in the early years of this Buddhist movement, and then you've done much more kind of professional work with executives and leadership in business, etc.
What you're describing there is, I hope, a progressive loss of naivety. I hope it's that.
Yeah.
When certainly, my early days in the Buddhist organization, imagining that we were somehow going to change the world. When I look back at some of that, I think it's a kind of charming naivety at best. Really, really well-intentioned, but broadly naive, and not understanding the structural forces that actually.
Do you mean societally, not
societally, that hold the world in place, but also not understanding the structural forces which were the internal dynamic of the organization, which itself was at times problematic. But at the same time, I do want to make the world a better place, and I do think that people coming to a different kind of consciousness makes things better, a more informed consciousness, a wiser consciousness. I think people learning to work more skillfully with their own minds makes things better for everyone. But how you go about the process in the widest terms, I don't know. It's really, really interesting. I've been sort of engaged, I guess, in what was in the early days thought of as the mindfulness revolution. I'm getting back to revolution. The idea of bringing mindfulness into the mainstream in various ways. So I've been a part of that, and to some extent, pioneering mindfulness in the workplace and in leadership, to some small extent, without wanting to overblow that. And in the process, I've taught the techniques to many, many thousands of people. And I would hope that that's led to people making more skillful choices in their lives and in the lives of the people they lead. But I have no idea whether that's gone on. And what's interesting is that the mindfulness revolutions come sort of alongside the digital revolution, technological revolutions. And I am not sure that we're in a better place at all than we were in the 1970s, 80s, 90s even, 2000s, when the mindfulness revolution sort of kicked off in 80s, 90s, 2000s. I mean, Kabat-Zinn's work goes back to the 1970s. Can we say it's left the world a better place? Hard to tell, because it's come alongside the technological revolution, which has produced this extraordinary outrage machine that has divided societies, given rise to populism. It's come alongside the rise of demagoguery all over the world. Are things better as a result of people learning to work differently with their minds and their mental states? So many more people? Who knows? Who knows? The structural forces at work in the world are vast and incomprehensible, really, unknowable. And you do your best. And hopefully some people benefit. Yeah.
I imagine you've been in contact with people kind of ongoing over some years in this work, with your work with mindfulness in the workplace. Do you see, there was one of the videos that you did earlier was about awakening, and how awakening was not just a calmer mind.
Yeah.
And I think it's very familiar to a lot of us, just the desire to be a bit more chilled out, a bit more relaxed, a bit more happy.
Yeah.
I'm interested, though, in a way, staying with this question of society, is like, are there people who kind of get that deeper implication of awakening rather than just mindfulness as relaxation in the broader movement?
In the broader mindfulness movement,
Yes.
in, say, mindful leadership circles and so on. Well, I'm very, very heartened by Sam Harris's work
Mm.
and by his app,
Mm.
Waking Up app. I think it speaks not just to relaxation, I think
Absolutely.
it speaks to wisdom.
Mm.
Some of the apps, I think, are just about calming the mind and helping people to deal with stress and so on, which I don't knock. You know, if people do that, that's great.
Mm.
But there's not a lot out there which is about helping people to come to a much greater, deeper insight into what's actually going on.
Mm.
And I don't think we're yet fully at a place of receptivity to that in, say, the workplace in general, or maybe even leadership circles in general. In some of the programs I run at business schools, sometimes I do get to talk at greater depth, and sometimes that goes down quite well.
Mm.
Sometimes there's sympathetic resonance.
Mm.
But broadly, it's not something I'm asked for very much.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. Although I really am not all that interested in teaching mindfulness for relaxation. Really not.
Yeah, of course.
I'm interested in helping people to understand how their minds work.
Mm.
And that's what I do.
Mm.
That's what I endeavor to do. That's the focus of my efforts, is to try to get people to see from the first hand, you know, from first-hand experience, how their minds are generating their experience, and how they can begin to do stuff with their own minds so that they come to have a different kind of experience. And then following from that different kind of experiencing, different kinds of decision-making follow.
I'm curious partly about how best to present that. I know Sam Harris's work quite well, and I noticed that he doesn't make any apology for talking directly about Vipassana or awakening or.
No,
and
that's his audience.
That's
his audience.
Yeah.
He would leave my audience bewildered.
Okay. Yes.
You know, speaking that language, and he wouldn't. He's smart enough not to do that. But you know, the people I'm talking to just don't have the references. You know, so it wouldn't make any kind of sense. You start always from the people you're with.
From the world that they're in.
And with the people you're with. You talk to the people you're with.
Yeah.
You know, the idea is you do your best to help people where you find them, however you can. And you know, I've got a very limited capacity to do that. You know, I've got a few tools that I can share, and that's what I'm trying to do.
So in your experience of awakening, in the way that you feel you've encountered it in your life, how does it affect your life living now, living here?
Okay, so first of all, I make no claim to be awakened, right? I'm not enlightened. I'm just somebody getting on with their life. That said, I've had a number of experiences which I think of as awakening experiences. So a number of periods in my life where on intense retreat or in other contexts I've had awakening experiences. And I guess a consequence of that is I feel increasingly as these, as it were, build in a certain way. You know, there's you have an experience, and then it begins to fade away, and you get involved in other things and other things and other things, and then years maybe down the track, another experience, and then that fades away, and so on. I think the accumulation of these things means that in some ways, certainly, I absolutely no longer believe in a self. That's one thing. So that said, I don't live completely selflessly. Those habits come back and have come back. So I can feel hurt, or I can feel bits of pride or bits of shame or things that ordinarily accrue to a self. but I don't think of them in relation to a self in a certain way.
That's interesting. So there's selfing going on, but without the belief in a self. Have I got that?
Yeah, I think there's some kind of diffuse selfing going on, but there is no belief in a self, for sure. No belief in a self.
And for you, was there a moment or a retreat where the belief in self evaporated?
No, it's been a process over time.
Gradually.
It's been a process over time. But just something I've been reflecting on recently is that I just don't think in those terms. I absolutely do not see there being some kind of little person in the center of my head to whom all of this is happening, or who is sensing all these things around me. That's just gone.
Yeah.
That little mannequin has left the stage, completely left the stage. I think I find it easier to forgive, to be kinder. I try to be kinder. I find it easier in certain contexts just to come to a state of contentment, to sit with whatever is happening around me, especially in nature, and just be happily absorbed. I can just sit quietly up on our deck, enjoying being there with nothing much that I need to be doing. Feel okay to be doing that. I feel less driven. Just make one thing really plain, as I do not think of myself as awakened. But I do recognize the possibility of there being more awakening experiences down the track. And I look forward to these. And who knows what will emerge from them.
I mean, you've said this a few times, and also in the earlier videos that we were doing about not thinking of yourself as awakened. Well, it's not the only way of teaching awakening in the world. You know, not everybody, not all teachers would be saying, well, I'm not awakened, because they might fear actually undermining the confidence that the audience have in them.
Oh. Well, I don't care about that.
Yeah.
Well, I don't care about that. I mean, you know, the stuff I say either makes sense or doesn't make sense. It stands on its own merits. You know, I'm no big deal. I really do know that. I really do know that. I'm just an ordinary dude. I really am just an ordinary dude with very limited talents and limited capacity. I've no great charisma, no great intelligence, no great emotional intelligence, no great empathy, no great compassion, no great nothing. I'm just me getting by in the world. I've had certain experiences and I've engaged in certain practices. I can help people to engage in those practices. I'd love to. That's what I care about. I'd love to see more people practicing because I think it's just good in itself. I don't rate myself very highly, and I don't put myself down. I'm okay. It's fine. This is all good. But I'm no big deal. I really am no big deal. And I think the idea of going around saying that you're awakened, well, you've got a lot to live up to. And, you know, sadly, you know, what we've seen time and again in religious circles and Buddhist circles more recently is a lot of people who've been held up as being awakened, falling short big time. You know, ending up in financial scandals or sexual abuse scandals or with alcohol addiction and various other issues going on. Power abuse problems, financial scandals. It just, the catalogue is actually sadly long. Now, how does that happen? That's an interesting question. And I think part of it is that the claim to insight is a kind of get out of jail free card in some circles. That's one thing. You know, that enables crazy wisdom behavior. It's all a manifestation. This apparent recklessness is a manifestation of the person's pure freedom. They're able to just dance in the space of consciousness without a care in the world, you know, leaving a trail of wrecked lives behind them. crazy wisdom approach, I hope, is now becoming well discredited. I'd hope that people are able to see through charisma, because charisma and charm is not the same as actual insight. It's another matter, really, because a lot of people, have charismatic capacities, charismatic talents, which lead them to mislead others. But I think it is this relationship between insight and power that is probably the most troubling in spiritual circles, is that when people make claims to insight, and when their followers, disciples, however you want to put it, recognize them as possessing this, it gives them enormous power. And that power is very, very easily abused. It's the power to begin to shape the world for your own preferences and comfort. And you've got to be exceptionally wise, exceptionally smart to not be seduced into trying to arrange the world in line with your own prejudices and preferences. So you try to create around you a world that you are comfortable in, mistaking that for the world that should be, that needs to be. And that's a massive error. And the power that you're given in spiritual communities, when you have a credible claim to awakening, insight, enlightenment, whatever it is, grants you the power to do that. And it's, I think, incredibly rare not to see that power abused. Because it's of the nature of things that when people have that amount of power, it's so easy to use it just to shape things according to your preferences.
I imagine it's not always obvious that that's what you're doing if you're in a position like that.
It's not obvious to the person doing it.
Yeah.
They don't know that they're doing it. They're just doing what they think is right. And, what they think is right may have some basis to it, but it may not actually suit everybody else. And, something that I've seen a lot of, living in Buddhist communities, you live with people who are very charismatic sometimes and very influential and seem to have tremendous insight and understanding, and then want to just have things done their way because they think it's for the best. And the temptation to do that it's not a big deal temptation, if you see what I mean. It's so easy to slip into that. It's so subtle. It's just you doing what you think is right. And you think that by you doing what you think is right, others are going to benefit. If others do things your way, they will come to enjoy the fruits that you've come to enjoy. So you encourage them to do that, or you even insist that they do it. And may not be right for them, may not be the best thing. Who knows? I don't think awakening experiences eliminate your faults and failings. That's sainthood, and that's very, very few of those around. Very, very few. So I think that may be helpful if people can make that distinction between genuine sanctity, which is extraordinarily rare, and having some really valid and viable spiritual insights to share, and having someone who has had many spiritual insights, spiritual experiences, has stuff to share, but that doesn't make them a saint.
Yeah. in the work of teaching mindfulness in the workplace, I would imagine that you encounter ambition quite a lot.
A lot.
And maybe strongly.
I think the really interesting thing to do with ambition is to try to make it skillful. I talk about mindfulness in terms of allowing, letting what is the case be the case, letting what's here be what's here, letting me be who I am, letting others be who they are, letting the situation be what it is, treating that with some kindness, allowing what is the case to be the case. But when you can do that, let what's here be what's here, the next question is, well, it's like this, now what? Now what? And for me, the now what that I talk about is, well, what would be best? Best for me, best for others, best for the situation we're in, best for the planet. What would be best? And then you come to the interesting question is, how do you balance these things that would be best? How do you deal with these conflicting demands? And that's really interesting. And that's, how leadership needs to work its way out in the workplace and in the world. Trying to figure out some kind of accommodation between all different ideas of what would be best. And that's not easy. And that's the leadership task. So I speak in those sorts of terms. Being ambitious is fine if what you're interested in is, well, what would be best? But if your ambition is purely for yourself, purely self-referential, then I think that's going to lead to your own suffering and to the suffering of those around you. And we get plenty of that in the workplace. We get plenty of that in leadership circles. There's a disproportionate level of psychopathy in senior leadership circles. We certainly see that in politicians, and we see that in corporations. The people who are, unable to see others as equally valid human beings, and who don't see others as equally valid human beings, find it quite easy to manipulate their way into places of high status and success, or work things for their own advantage. We see lots of that. But it's not the whole picture. And there are plenty of people out there trying to do their best. And that's what I'm interested in, helping people who are interested in doing their best do better.
We're in a period of great transformation in terms of technology and what technology does to our world and our communication and our relationships. And, well, not all of it is beneficial.
No.
So I'm wondering what, if anything, does this path of awakening have to say to us about that, and what can it support for us?
Yeah. There's a few things I'd say. Something I heard recently on one of Sam Harris's podcasts, a lovely, I think it was on that podcast, was one of his guests saying, the United States has one of the most sophisticated information systems history has ever seen at present. And what it's done is created a world in which the two halves of the country can't talk to each other. They're just completely fallen apart. And what technology seems to have done in part, enabling communication, great, but also disabling it massively. And that's partly through the creation of the outrage machine. But that's a piece of it, and it's been pernicious. It's been utterly pernicious. Actually, I think that was Yuval Noah Harari talking to on another podcast. The outrage machine has been destructive, no question of that. And it continues to be destructive, and it continues to be invidious, and it's done by dumb AI, not even smart AI. Smart AI has the potential to be very, very much more pernicious. But what's happening right now is the competition for attention. And that's pernicious. Because everybody wants your attention. Why does everybody want your attention? Because when you get hold of someone's attention, you can shape their behavior. In order to shape anyone's behavior, in order to get them to do anything that you would like them to do, you first need to get hold of their attention. Get hold of their attention, you can move them. And everybody wants your attention. I say to the people I work with, the executives who I work with, look, everybody wants your attention. Your employer wants your attention. Your people want your attention. Clients want your attention, customers want your attention, your kids want your attention, your spouse wants your attention, partner wants your attention. Everybody wants your attention. And of course, Google and X and other platforms want your attention. Why do they want it? Not because they want to do you any good. They want it because they can sell it on to the highest bidder. Why does that high bidder want your attention? Because they can use it to shape your behavior. Yeah. And that's working very, very well at the moment, because we tend to just give it up. We tend to just give up our attention to our devices so easily, all the time. You walk around town these days, everyone's stuck in a device. And the devices, of course, are gathering data and getting more and more and more sophisticated and getting hold of people's attention and shaping their behavior in insidious ways. So that's terrible. And we need to be learning to choose how we deploy our attention. And that's one of the great outcomes of mindfulness training. You just get the capacity to choose where your attention goes. Something I talked about in a previous video is the capacity to notice where your attention's gone and to make a choice. Notice and choose. Notice and choose. That's indeed the first step in learning mindfulness meditation. Is you learn to notice what your attention's up to. You see that you're thinking, and then you choose to move your attention, say, back to the breath. So you notice and choose, notice and choose, notice and choose. And that capacity to notice develops over time. You get better, quicker at noticing what your attention is up to, and your capacity to choose, to make an informed choice about, no, I'll put my attention somewhere else. That capacity also increases with mindfulness training, and that has huge impacts. I mean, hopefully it helps you to manage the technology better, smarter, wiser. It also helps you with, deploying your attention so you can give it to your kids or give it to your spouse, give it to the people who report to you at work. Really, really important. So all of that is key, noticing and choosing. So mindfulness and the awakening, the journey to awakening, can be is a real aid to helping people to begin to deploy their attention more wisely. But there's something else on the way which is much more worrying than the outrage economy and, the attention economy and the outrage machine, which is the possibility that the AI, which knows us so well and so intimately, because it's got so much data, gets so smart that it starts to befriend us by way of imagined online friends or avatars or people in forums, luring us into conversations because we completely agree with what they're saying, because they completely know us and know what to say to us, and know exactly how to pitch things to us, and know exactly what we'll respond to. Because they've gathered so much data from us, and they're so good at processing it, so that they're able to begin to bend our attention, not so much through just getting hold of our attention and flashing an ad in front of our eyes, but actually by beginning to engage in conversations with us, and conversations where we really feel we're talking to a friend who knows us better than we know ourselves. And that's probably because the AI does know us better than we know ourselves at some point, certainly, given how much we're prepared to give to it. And my hope is that by cultivating mindfulness and compassion and walking the journey towards awakening, we can get smarter around the way we allow the AI that's going to be all around us to interact with us. We can just get smarter about it. I doubt that we can be smarter than it in some ways, but I think we can get smarter with it.